My name is Ren Ashford, and I'm 29 now. 11 years ago, 4 days before I was supposed to turn 18, my parents dismantled my birthday because my older sister burst into tears and said the celebration made her feel invisible. That same night, I left with everything I owned: two duffel bags, a rusted tin holding $1,300 I'd hidden a few bills at a time, and one phone call to the only person who had ever paid me what I was worth. Exactly a year later, at my grandmother's 80th birthday, thrown in a field of flowers I had grown with my own two hands, something happened our family still won't discuss out loud. My sister stood in the middle of those blooms, faced everything I'd built out of nothing, and came apart in front of 30 relatives. The family split down the middle that afternoon, and it has never come back together. But here's what none of them have ever understood: I didn't break my family. I just stopped being the glue. Welcome back to Hearth and Harvest Stories, where women who spent their whole lives being told to take up less space finally get to tell the entire story calmly, start to finish. If you've ever been the one expected to manage on her own while everyone else got carried, this one is for you. Drop a comment when you're done, and subscribe now, because you're going to want to see what happened in that field. To make sense of the birthday, you need to understand how our house worked. We ran like an emergency room. Whoever was bleeding loudest got the whole staff, the money, the attention, both parents at once, and my sister Marielle was almost always the one bleeding loudest. I figured out the math when I was 7. My second grade recital fell on the same evening Marielle, 10 at the time, developed a stomachache that vanished by 9 o'clock. Nobody from my family showed up. My mother explained it in the car afterward, calm as a teller counting bills. "Your sister needed us tonight. I'm sure you did fine." When I was 12, I saved my own birthday money for white sneakers. Within a month, they were shared because Marielle decided hers pinched. When a teacher praised something I'd done, my mother shrank it down before it reached the dinner table: quieter, smaller, not worth dwelling on. Attention in our house was rationed, and it was rationed to exactly one person. I want to be fair because fairness is the whole point of this story. My parents never hit me. I had food, clothes, a ride to school. But in the Ashford house, being okay wasn't a feeling, it was a job. I was hired for it at age 7, and I never got a day off. The only one who seemed to notice was my father. He'd catch my eyes across the wreckage of another canceled evening and give me a small nod, like a man watching a storm roll in that he had no plans to run from. The summer I turned 15, he found me weeding my grandmother's flower beds and said, out of nowhere, "18 is yours, kid. Whatever party you want, that's a promise." I buried that promise like a seed and checked on it for 3 years. That turned out to be my biggest mistake. It took exactly that long to grow into the worst night of my life. You should know my sister fairly too, because this story is unfair to her in a completely different shape. Marielle was 21 that fall, 3 years older than me, and had already started and quit 2 colleges. Each time followed the same script: a midnight phone call, a crisis, my mother mobilizing like a general. Nobody in our house ever used the word failure. Marielle wasn't supported enough. Marielle was more sensitive than most people. Every collapse got repackaged as a diagnosis, and every diagnosis came with a bill my parents seemed almost proud to pay. Here's what I only understood years later: they built her that way on purpose. From the time she could talk, Marielle was told she was fragile, so fragility became the only self she had. She needed rescuing the same way I needed to not need anything. We were cast in those roles before either of us could spell them. The clearest example is my FFA banquet the spring I turned 16. I'd won a county ribbon for an irrigation system I'd designed for a raised garden bed, the first thing anyone had ever publicly recognized me for. My parents actually came, which shocked me. Then Marielle called from a parking lot, crying about a boy, and we left before the awards were finished. I rode home holding my ribbon in the dark. In the kitchen, Marielle saw it and her face folded like I'd slapped her. "Tonight was already terrible for me, and you're standing there with a trophy. This is supposed to be about me." She said it the way you'd cite a law, because in our house it was one. My mother put the kettle on for Marielle. Nobody asked to see my ribbon. I pinned it inside my closet door, where the things that were only mine had to live. What kept me steady was dirt. At 14, I started working weekends at a greenhouse. On the edge of town, hauling flats and scrubbing pots for a woman named Etta Marsh, 63, built like a fence post, incapable of a compliment she didn't mean. Etta paid me real money, gave me the occasional eye roll and unsolicited advice, which compared to home felt like generosity. By 17, I could run her seed room alone. Every paycheck went into a savings account. By that September, 3 years of Saturdays had turned into $9,412. Here's the detail that matters. I'd opened that account at 14, and the bank required an adult cosigner, which made it a joint account with my mother's name on it too. At 17, I asked about opening my own account. The teller said I'd need a parent to sign off until 18. My mother smiled and said, "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." She said the same line in June, again in August. I noticed the pattern. I want that on the record, I noticed. So I started skimming a little of my own harvest, cashing 20 here, 40 there, folding the bills into an empty coffee tin behind my winter boots. By September, it held $1,300. I told myself I was being paranoid. Looking back, I wasn't paranoid at all. I was just slow to admit what was in front of me. The party I'd planned wasn't much. Dinner in my grandmother's backyard, string lights through the maple tree, a sheet cake from Hartwell Bakery, chocolate with cream filling, my name piped in yellow icing, 15 folding chairs, Etta invited and threatening to actually show up. That was the entire dream, one evening, one table, everyone's attention pointed at the same person for once. My father had promised. For 3 years I'd carried that promise around like a seed packet. 18 also meant something else. I'd been accepted into the state agricultural program starting in spring, and past that, blurry but real, was the only future I'd ever wanted. A cut flower farm with my name on it. My grandmother Opal was the one who planted that dream in me first. She grew a deep garnet dahlia behind her house, a variety her family had kept alive since before my father was born, petals so dark red they looked like they were absorbing light instead of reflecting it. That August she walked me down her row, touched one bloom and said, "Flowers never apologize for taking up space in the garden." I noticed that too. The way you notice a door standing open that used to always be shut. 3 weeks before my birthday, Marielle announced a third attempt at school, a design program 2 hours away. Very exclusive, very urgent. It needed a deposit right away, she said, or her spot would go to someone whose family actually believes in her. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said it, because our kitchen went quiet in the specific way I'd learned to recognize the sound of money about to change direction. Marielle lasted 11 days. 4 days before my birthday, a Friday, she came home at 1 in the morning. By breakfast, the gravity in the house had shifted entirely around her. My mother moved through the kitchen like a triage nurse. My father sat with his coffee, studying the table. Marielle took up the entire couch, narrating how unfair the city had been. I made toast and said nothing, which was, as always, my job. That evening I overheard my mother in the hallway with my Aunt Patris. Her voice had that smoothed-over, rehearsing-a-story tone. I caught the words, "What's best for the family right now?" and then, quieter, aimed sideways at me. "She's got her whole life for parties." I stood in my room holding 15 invitations I'd hand-lettered myself, a small dahlia drawn in the corner of each one. We'd never gotten around to mailing them, because some part of me had already known better than to make it official. I told myself the math might still work, that even in an emergency room house, a girl only turns 18 once, and surely that outweighed a bad week. The next morning my mother knocked on my door with 2 mugs of cocoa. She had her gift-wrapping voice on. "Sweetheart, about Tuesday, my birthday had already been demoted to a day of the week. Your dad and I have been talking. With everything your sister's going through, a party right now would just rub salt in it. Watching you celebrate while her life is falling apart, it would break her." I asked what they wanted to do instead. "Postpone," she said, bright as a coupon. "Just until Marielle's stronger, we'll do something small later, family only." Later in our house was where things went to quietly die. I looked at her and asked the one question I'd never once asked at that table in my whole life. "When exactly is my turn, Mom? I'd like to see the calendar." Her face flickered, then settled, and she said the sentence that has followed me for 11 years. "Oh, Ren, don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own." There it was, the family rulebook, read aloud at last. Being fine was my C. Contribution, the toll I paid so the household budget could balance. My father appeared in the doorway. 18 is yours, kid, I promise." His hand went to the doorframe. His mouth opened. Then Marielle called up from downstairs, wet and urgent, and the doorway was empty again. 30 seconds, maybe less. That's how long a 3-year promise takes to fold in on itself. I sat very still after they left, listening to the house rearrange itself around my sister. I didn't scream and I didn't beg. If you've ever been the designated strong one, you know why. Practice. What I did was open my laptop and check the savings balance. That evening the bakery called and everything snapped into focus. They'd kept my chocolate sheet cake, the one I'd picked out in July, but scraped my name off the order. It now read, "Welcome home, Marielle." There would be a dinner the following Saturday, 4 days after my own birthday would pass unmarked, and the guest list, I found out later, was almost exactly mine. My party hadn't been postponed, it had been harvested for parts. I thanked the woman on the phone, because none of this was hers to carry. I hung up and stood there while something in my chest went very quiet and very level, like a field right after the harvester passes. People imagine decisions like mine get made in a blaze. Mine came the way frost comes, clear sky, no wind, and then everything is just finished growing. I took my 2 duffel bags down from the closet shelf. I packed work clothes, boots, the ribbon from behind the closet door, and the 15 invitations I never sent. I pulled the coffee tin out from behind my winter boots and counted it by feel. Then I sat on my bed and called the only adult who had ever paid me on time and on purpose. Etta listened for about 10 seconds. "There's a bed in the loft over the seed room," she said. "It's drafty, rent's $40 a month and you'll earn it before sunrise most days. Come or don't." My birthday was still 3 days out. I didn't wait for it. I left that same night. I came down the stairs with a bag on each shoulder. My mother was at the kitchen island with her tea. She looked at the bags, then at me, and chose annoyance over alarm. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Wren, don't be theatrical." I told her I had work in the morning, which was true, and left the rest unsaid. My father followed me onto the porch and pressed a folded envelope into my hand, $60 in 5s and 10s. "Call your grandmother on Sundays," he said. "She'll worry." He didn't say don't go. We both heard him not say it. I walked the 2 miles to the greenhouse under a sky the color of a bruised plum. The loft was exactly as drafty as promised. I lay on the narrow bed and understood something I'd been circling for years. Being fine had been the rent I paid to live in that house. That night, I stopped paying it. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a grocery store cupcake. Wednesday morning, I went to the bank to collect 3 years of Saturdays. That's when the teller's expression changed. The balance was $912. $80, $500 had come out 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Marielle's very exclusive program needed its deposit fast. Every stall made sense at once. My mother hadn't been forgetting to sign my paperwork. She'd kept the gate open until she was done using the field. Here's the part I need every one of you to sit with. It was completely legal. A joint account belongs to both names on it. She didn't steal a cent, not in the eyes of the law. She just spent 3 years of my Saturdays on a program my sister quit in 11 days. I called her from the parking lot. She didn't even pause. "Family money goes where the family needs it, Wren. Your sister's whole future was on the line. You're young, you're healthy, you'll earn it back in no time." Then, softer, like a tip left on a table, "This is just what families do." I went back inside, withdrew the $912, and closed the account with both hands steady. I waited until I was in Etta's truck before I let them shake. By Sunday, my mother had already told the family her version, a tantrum over a party, abandoning my sister mid-crisis, storming out to punish everyone. It played well at church. It played even better at the salon. I didn't call back to argue, and I want to explain why. My mother had been rehearsing the role of family narrator for 52 years. Arguing with her in front of an audience would have been an away game against a Hall of Famer. I decided my side of the story would have to grow up out of the ground, where nobody could talk over it. The first Sunday of October, a mud-brown sedan pulled into the greenhouse lot, and my grandmother Opal climbed out, 79 years old, cane in one hand, a shoebox under her arm. Inside, packed in wood shavings, were dahlia tubers dug from the garnet row behind her house. Her family had kept that variety alive since the year my father was born. "Do you know what the CR?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "Plant them somewhere they'll get looked at." Then she patted my cheek and said she was missing her show. I made it to her taillights before I finally fell apart. Being robbed hadn't managed that. Being given something did. That fall and winter my life shrank down to a rhythm you could set a clock by. Greenhouse from 5:30 to 2. A dinner shift at the diner until 10. In the loft, I read Edda's growing manuals until the words swam, succession, planting, cold hardiness, stem counts per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out, which Edda told me was the entire job. I also wrote to the agricultural program and deferred my spot a year. I told them it was financial. That was true, but not the whole truth. Somewhere between the bank and the shoebox, my plan had changed shape. My grandmother reported in every Sunday dry as toast. Your sister's resting, your mother's managing, your father's mowing a lawn that stopped growing back in October. If you've ever worked a double shift while the person who took from you slept in your old room, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story is starting to feel like yours, subscribe now, because this is the part where the ground starts to turn. Thanksgiving came, and my mother has never let a holiday go to waste. She called warm as a casserole. We want you at the table, sweetheart. We're ready to put the whole outburst behind us. I asked what that would require because with my mother, forgiveness always came with terms. Apologize to Marielle in front of the family. Move back into my old room. Contribute to the household. Let go of this little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself further. I looked out at Edda's frost-dead field and felt the strangest calm. And if I say no, her voice cooled by exactly 1 degree. We worry about your sister, Ren. She's fragile. You've always been fine, honestly, it's the one thing we never had to think about. There it was again, Article 1 of the family constitution. I told her I had to work Thanksgiving morning. Then don't bother coming at Christmas either, she said, and hung up first. She always hung up first. It would be almost 10 months before I heard her voice again, and by then everything about the ground between us would have changed. Christmas Eve, the loft was so quiet I could hear the propane heater deciding whether to keep working. I wrote my mother a card. It took an hour, 4 drafts, the last one down to almost nothing. Merry Christmas, Mom, I'm safe, I'm working. I sat there with the stamp on my tongue and understood I wasn't writing to my actual mother. I was writing to a mother I'd invented, one who would read it at the sink and soften and drive over with Coco. That woman had never lived at my parents' address. I put the card in the drawer, with my 15 unsent invitations. Around 8, my grandmother let herself into the seed room with a tin of molasses cookies, and no explanation of where she'd told my parents she was going. Edda stomped in near 9 with a heavy spool of striped ribbon. For your first market table, she said, daring me to make it a moment. I didn't dare, but after they'd gone, I stood the spool on the windowsill and understood it for what it was. A bet. 2 old women had just wagered on a girl with $900 in a shoebox. In January, Edda raised the stakes herself. She walked me out to the back field and pointed. 2 acres, south-facing, water already run to the old sheep trough. I don't do charity, she said before I could speak. 3 seasons, $900 a season. First season up front. You bring your own sweat, your own seed, your own mistakes, written down proper. Both our signatures, so neither of us gets sentimental. $900 was nearly everything I had left. I stood on the frozen ground and ran the math 3 times. The math said no, something underneath it said now. I signed at her kitchen table that Friday, 2 acres, $900 and a shoebox. That was my entire inheritance, and it turned out to be enough. I let the agricultural program's deadline pass on purpose. I want to be honest, it scared me worse than leaving home had. Leaving home, I'd had somewhere specific to walk toward. This time I was stepping off the edge of my own map, but you can't grow anything with 1 foot still out of the field. That February, I buried my grandmother's tubers in trays of damp shavings, and the first green nubs broke through on the exact morning the county paper would have called foolish. Spring made me pay for my confidence almost immediately. I planned it out ahead of schedule because the 10-day forecast smiled at me. Then a frost slid down out of the north on a clear, windless night, the kind that never announces itself. I walked the row at dawn with $400 of seedlings gone to wet brown rags. I'd known better, I'd heard the warning and gambled anyway because hope is a beautiful liar. I gave myself 1 hour to feel sick about it, then got out the notebook and wrote down the date, the temperature, and the lesson, because self-pity doesn't compost into anything but records do. Edda came out around 7 and delivered the eulogy. Frost isn't a verdict, girl, it's tuition. We replanted, leaning harder on tougher stock, zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, snapdragons, and I bobbied the dahlias in their trays like a maternity ward, because those weren't just plants. Those were the only inheritance anyone had ever actually handed me. By the last week of May, the field had gone from graph paper to green rows straight enough that Etta grunted at them, which from Etta was a parade. By the first Saturday of June, I had a problem I'd never planned for: buckets and buckets of flowers and nowhere to sell them. I took 8 feet of Saturday at the Hartwell Farmers Market, dressed a borrowed card table with Etta's ribbon, and lettered a chalkboard sign at midnight. My first customer was a retired teacher who told me nobody had sold real flowers at that market in years. By noon, I'd sold out completely, $340 in a cigar box, mostly fives, and my cheeks aching from a shape they weren't used to holding. Every bill in that box had grown out of ground I'd rented with my own signature, and money like that carries a different weight. Word travels the way it travels in a town like Hartwell. 2 women from my mother's own church stopped by and suddenly got very interested in the sweet peas. Before the market even closed, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. One line: "A market stall, congratulations." I read it twice, dropped the phone in the cash box, and sold my last 3 bouquets. I never answered it. The field answered for me all summer long. In July, a bride named Hannah stopped at my stall, got teary over the snapdragons, and asked if I did weddings. I said yes with the confidence of someone who had never once done a wedding. Late August is when the dahlias came in my grandmother's garnet, fattest saucers I'd ever grown, and I built Hannah's bouquet around 9 of them. At the reception, the caterer pointed across the room at me. "The Dahlia girl," she said, and it stuck the way only accidental names do. 2 bridesmaids took cards I didn't have yet, so I wrote my number on craft paper in florist's crayon. Something had shifted, and I could feel it the way you feel a season turning through a window before you ever open the door. By Labor Day, the stall needed a name. My best friend Priya sanded an old fence board, painted Ashford Fields on it in buttermilk white, and screwed it to the stall before I could vote on it. My name, in paint, in public. I stood there feeling completely exposed, which tells you everything about how I was raised. By September, the operation looked like an actual business if you squinted with kindness. 25 subscription customers took a wrapped bouquet every Friday. Peak Saturdays cleared $600. I paid Etta for season 2 in full, early, in cash, mostly to watch her fight down a smile. She took it and told me the trellis rows were crooked, which from Etta meant congratulations. Here's what matters for what comes next. I still worked the back of the stall. Priya chatted up the customers. I kept my hat brim low. Some habits are load-bearing. Meanwhile, my grandmother's Sunday reports kept coming. Marielle had quit her online course and gone quiet. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which my grandmother said was its own kind of mention. The whole town was doing math my mother couldn't stop them from doing. The Tuesday after Labor Day, the county paper called wanting a profile. My mouth said no before my brain had even sat up, the reflex of a girl trained from birth to pass the microphone down the table. I told Etta that evening, expecting agreement, since Etta regards publicity roughly the way she regards aphids. Instead, she set her coffee down with a click. For a year, other people have been telling your story at every dinner table in this county, and you handed them the pen because keeping your head down felt like good manners. That reporter's handing the pen back. Take it. I called back the next morning. The reporter, Dana, walked my rows for 2 hours and asked questions nobody in my family had ever once asked me. Why dahlias? What did the frost teach you? When the photographer looked for a backdrop, I did the bravest thing I'd done since a September night with 2 duffel bags. I stood alone, dead center in the garnet row, dirt under my nails, and looked straight into the lens. The story ran the following Thursday, the 18-year-old behind Ashford Fields. Dana had written it clean and warm: the greenhouse job at 14, the lease 2 acres, the frost, the wedding, the heirloom tubers from my grandmother. She never mentioned my parents once, and in a town like Hartwell, that silence was louder than anything she could have printed. Town did the math in one sitting. Women I'd never met signed up for the subscription. My mother's version of events folded quietly, the way a lie folds when a photograph walks into the room. She called Friday morning. No hello. You put our family's business in the newspaper, Ren. I pointed out the article never mentioned the family at all. Exactly, she said, her voice shaking. Everyone's asking your sister what she's doing now. Do you have any idea what that does to her? Of course you don't. You've always been fine. I looked out over 2 acres of proof and said, gently, you're right, Mom, I don't. For the first time in my whole life, I hung up first. Marielle said nothing at all. In a house where feelings were broadcast at full volume, that silence was a new instrument. I should have wondered harder what it was tuning up for, because the next call came from my grandmother, and it came with a demand. My grandmother turned 80 at the end of September and called me herself, which she did roughly never. "They're planning my party," she said. "Patris wants the church hall. Your mother wants the house where she can manage things." A pause. "I told them I've sat in both those rooms my whole life. I want my party in your field in the middle of something honest. I already told the whole family. I announced it so nobody could wiggle out." I sat down hard on an overturned bucket. My field, 30-some relatives including 2 parents and 1 sister I hadn't laid eyes on in a year. Mom will never come." "She'll come," my grandmother said, flat as a griddle. "Skipping my 80th in front of everyone, your mother would rather chew glass. That's exactly why I did it, sweet pea. It's my birthday. I'm allowed 1 present. I picked myself." "Would you have let them come?" I stood in my rows for an hour after that call, arguing with the dahlias. "If it were you, the cancelled party, the emptied account, the year of silence, tell me what you'd have done. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because a cancelled 18th birthday is about to collide with an 80th. 1 week out, my mother called with a small favor. She opened with logistics, then slid a knife into the picnic basket. "One small thing, sweetheart. When people ask about the farm, it would mean the world if you'd frame it as a family project, because honestly, that's what it is. You learned your work ethic somewhere." I laughed, 1 short syllable I couldn't hold in. "And we think it would be healing for Marielle to have a role there. Events, parties, that kind of thing, she has such an eye. Just if it comes up, you could mention Marielle handles events for Ashford Fields. She needs a win, Ren. You have so many now." There it was, the billing department, open for business. "No, Mom," I said, calm as I could manage. "The farm isn't an apology and it isn't a prop, but you're both welcome Sunday as guests. I'd genuinely like you to come." The silence went on a beat too long. "Fine," she said lightly, and I thought I'd closed the door. I had only closed the front one. The party fell on the last Sunday of September, almost exactly a year since I'd carried 2 duffel bags down my parents' stairs. Priya and Etta hauled the long tables into the aisle between the dahlia rows, and I strung lights through the fence posts and the young maple by the gate, the exact kind I'd once planned for a backyard on Larkspur Street. Yes, I noticed. I hung them anyway. Mid-afternoon, my father's truck eased up the lane, alone, loaded with 40 folding chairs from the church hall. We hadn't stood face to face in a year. He got out, looked down the rows and said, "Ground drain's good here." That's a love letter in my father's language. We set up chairs together for an hour, mostly quiet. Twice he started to say something and folded it back up, like the $60 in fives. At the gate, leaving, he got as far as, "Your grandmother's real proud," before driving off toward the house where my mother was, no doubt, ironing the outfits and the story both. The next afternoon, 31 members of my family walked into my field. Every single one of them came, even her, especially her. You could see it land, 1 face at a time, at the gate. Late September had dressed the place better than I ever could have. 200 garnet dahlias down the long tables, the light going gold, the rose burning red out to the fence line. My grandmother arrived like a head of state and installed herself at the head table, where she could supervise both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped out of the car in her navy dress, never once looking surprised, touring the tables telling an aunt, "Oh, we always knew Ren had the gift. She gets it from my side." Smooth as fondant. A year of tantrum and abandonment, repaved in 1 afternoon into "we always knew." I let it go by. The field didn't need me to argue for it. Marielle came last, 40 minutes late, in a dress too formal for folding chairs. She hugged my grandmother for the photo, took a lemonade she never drank, and drifted the edges of the field alone, reading my life like an audit. I watched her stop at Priya's fence board sign and stand there, very still, longer than anyone stands in front of a sign. Just before the toasts, I went to cut a few last stems and found my mother alone at the far end of the garnet row, touching one of the big blooms with 2 fingers, barely, the way you'd touch a sleeping baby or a stove you suspected was still hot. "We had a row like this," she said, not really to me. "Behind the house on Delancey Street. I started a whole flat of seeds the spring I was 19. I had a notebook." I stood very still, the way you do when a wild thing hasn't spotted you yet. "Then your grandmother Ellen got sick and it was 2 years, start to finish, and I was the one. Your grandfather couldn't handle hospitals, so it was me every day before work and after. Her fingers left the pedal. He got the truck when she passed. Everyone said he'd been through so much. My flat of seeds dried up on the windowsill. Nobody watered it. Everybody was too busy telling him how strong he'd have to be. For the length of one breath, I saw the hole in her, a girl with a notebook, run through the exact same machine 30 years before me. I almost said, "Mom, I know. That's the closest we have ever come in my entire life." Then she felt me there and her spine reassembled and the visitor left her face like a light switching off in a farmhouse window. "That's life, Ren," she said briskly, already turning back. "The strong ones carry it. That's what love is." She walked back to the party. I stood in the row and let the bees have the silence. Then the spoon rang against a glass. My grandmother stood without help, which she wanted noted. 80 years, and I've had birthdays in kitchens, church halls, and one memorable year, a hospital. This is the first one I've ever had in the middle of something honest. She turned to the buckets of garnet on the tables. My daughter grew this dahlia. I grew it the year Tom was born, and every year after. Last fall I gave the tubers to my granddaughter, because a flower like this needs hands that show up in the frost, and I know showing up hands when I see them. She looked straight at me, chin trembling, voice not. It never had a proper name, that flower. So today I'm naming it in front of witnesses so it sticks. Opal's garnet, grown by Wren Ashford on Wren Ashford's farm. This field is the most honest thing this family has grown in 30 years. The applause came warm and real, and 31 faces turned toward me. For once in my life, I stood in the light and didn't check the exits. And that is the exact moment my mother rose from her chair, glass high, and rode the applause like a woman catching a train about to leave without her. One more piece of happy news, while we're all together. You've all read about our Wren in the paper. Well, Ashford Fields is becoming a true family business. Marielle, honey, stand up. Marielle is going to be running all the events and parties here at the farm. Both our girls together. The clapping started up again, uncertain, the way crowds clap when something feels off but nobody wants to be first to notice. Beside my mother, my sister was rising slowly to her feet, glass already shaking. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my mother across the long table, 31 relatives between us, and said, "That's not true, Mom, and it's not going to be, no matter how simple you make it sound." The uncertain clapping died. My mother's smile held its shape, but something behind it started working hard. She opened her mouth to smooth it over, and never got there, because Marielle's glass hit the table, and my sister made a sound I had never once heard from her, a laugh with the bottom torn out of it. "Of course it's not true," she said, too loud then louder. "Nothing about us is true. You want to clap for the girls, it was supposed to be me. Everything was supposed to be me, that was the whole deal." She swung toward the relatives. "You think she built this alone? They canceled her 18th birthday because I cried. Canceled the party, kept the cake, changed the name on it. My name, I ate that cake." She was crying now, mascara running, 22 years of curated fragility burning off like fog. And the money, they took her savings. $8,500, her paychecks. They poured it into me, into that program, and I flushed it in 11 days like I flush everything. My mother was on her feet. "Marielle, sweetheart, you're not well." Marielle wheeled on her, arm flung wide, and her hand caught the zinc bucket at the head table. It went over slow, the way disasters do. 24 stems of my grandmother's garnet spilled onto the September GR. Ass, red on green, in front of the whole family. In the ocean of quiet that followed, my aunt stood up, white to the lips, and said, "You told us she left over a party." What I remember best about the next minute is the stillness. Etta by the coffee urn, watching my mother the way you'd watch a hawk over a henhouse. Marielle sobbing into her hands, emptied out, smaller than I had ever seen her. My mother kneeling in the grass in her navy dress, gathering fallen dahlias into her arms one by one, because her hands needed a task while her whole story did its arithmetic. Then she looked up at me and said it low, just for the two of us. "You can fix this, Wren. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we helped you start this place. It's barely even a lie. Give your sister the events job. This goes back together. You come home, sweetheart." And here is the part I need you to understand. I wanted it. 11 years later, I can say that plainly. Every cell in me that was ever 7 years old wanted it because it was the actual prize, finally held out in the open air, my mother, asking me to come home. All I had to do was pay for it. Same currency as always, shrink the truth, hand over the story. disappear at my own table one more time. I looked at her arms full of my grandmother's flowers. I heard the whole field behind me finally seeing. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice level as a floor. "I've always been fine on my own. You made sure I got the practice. But I'm not buying my seat back. Not with the truth, not with the farm, not with me. You're welcome at my table as guests, both of you, any Sunday you want. That's the whole offer. It doesn't go on sale." My mother stood up slowly, still holding the dahlias, and for a second, even then, I thought. Then she laid them on the table like evidence, took Marielle by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back. She never has. The party didn't end so much as exhale. My grandmother announced it was the best birthday she'd had in 80 years, and she'd thank people not to argue, which somehow gave everyone permission to stay another hour. My father stood at the gate a long time after my mother's car was gone. When I brought him his jacket, he turned his cap in his hands. "I should have said something at your 18th. I've been saying nothing for 20 years, Ren. Turns out it's the loudest thing I ever did." I told him I knew, not "it's okay." I was done saying that one. Just, "I know, Dad." He nodded and went home to the house he'd chosen every day of my life because that's who he was. That November, letters started coming, one a month, 4 lines at a time. Saw dahlias on a calendar at the feed store. "Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad, I kept every one." When the last taillights left, I walked out alone to the far end of the garnet row, evening coming down blue and cold. One stem lay snapped where the bucket had gone over. I picked it up and understood the last thing I'd been circling all year without quite landing on it. I'd stopped paying rent a year earlier, but some part of me had still been waiting for the landlord to drive by, see the garden, and want me back. That was over now. It had walked out of the field on its own 2 feet. Here's where it all settled, in the plain math of afterward. Patris came the next weekend with lemon squares and an apology she'd written out longhand so she wouldn't botch it. Sunday dinners moved to my grandmother's kitchen. Her, Patris, Priya, half the time me. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to be smaller. My mother tried a new version of the story for a while, but a story needs listeners, and hers kept moving their subscriptions to the other side of the aisle. We haven't spoken since she walked out of the field, and I've made my peace with the possibility that we never will, because peace was only ever on offer at a price I don't pay anymore. My father writes his 4 lines a month, and slips a 20 in at Christmas like contraband, loving me the way a man loves from inside a fence he built himself. And Marielle, one night that winter past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words my sister had sent me in over a year. "The flowers were beautiful. That's all. No apology, no follow-up. I heard she moved 2 hours away and got a job at a garden center of all places on this round earth." I never answered the text. I never deleted it either. Some seeds you just leave in the packet and see how you feel come spring. The farm went on being a farm, which is the quiet miracle of farms. Season 3 sold out its subscriptions by April. My grandmother's garnet went into the ground in May, 300 tubers strong, everyone descended from a shoebox. In June, a girl named Della started showing up, 14, all elbows, quiet in the way of a kid who wins ribbons nobody drives out to see. I recognized the species on site. I pay her real wages. I make her invoice. Me out loud, looking me in the eye. The first time she managed it without apologizing first, I gave her a raise on the spot. That's the crop I'm proudest of, if you're asking. Not the flowers. The girl learning 3 years earlier than I did that she's allowed to send a bill for what she gives, and that anyone who only loves the version of you that disappears isn't family. They're just a landlord with your childhood photos on the wall. If there's one thing I'd carve on a fence and nail up where every fine-on-her-own girl could read it, it's this. Love you have to earn by disappearing isn't love. It's rent. And the day you stop paying it, you finally find out who was family and who was only ever collecting. That's my story. A canceled cake, a shoebox of dahlia tubers, 2 acres and 1 signature. If you've ever been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something of your own this year and stand somewhere it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you would have said in that field. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe to Hearth and Harvest Stories. Next week, another woman tells the whole truth calmly, all the way to the end.